Hello and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint, proud to present to you a latest series of crisp and clear strategic discussions called the General's Talk, featuring Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar and Lieutenant General Satish Dua. Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, a retired Director General of the Artillery, now a professor in the Aerospace Department of the IIT Chennai. He is also an author of a strategic blog called thegunnershot.com. Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UYSM, SM, VSM, served as the Chief of the Integrated Defence Staff to the Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Today, he is a strategic thinker as well as an author of a book called The India's Brave Hearts. Subscribe to Dev Talks and hear what the generals have to say. With the upcoming theaterization of the armed forces, there is an increased discussion among strategic circles with regard to what is the format of the various commands, as well as the responsibility of the three chiefs and the CDS. This, to an extent, is bound to happen as it is the amalgamation of long-standing traditions in each force into one cohesive unit, more efficient and more capable than before. We have prepared a two-part video series wherein we would be discussing the upcoming move towards the theaterization of the armed forces. The first one, would take up what the whole process is all about and how do we see the structures being set up in a broad manner. I welcome you both to this interesting discussion, sir, on a topic which is upcoming on the Indian Armed Forces called the theaterization. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adi. We look forward to this series called The General's Talk, and it's a great feeling to be on a show with my good old friend, General Satish Dua.
Thank you, Adi, for inviting me or inviting us, and it's a pleasure. Likewise, it's a pleasure to be here with General Shankar. Looking forward to an interesting interaction with you.
I'd like to open this discussion with a very basic question. I'd request both of you to come in with your thought process on what is theaterization and why do we need it at this moment, or why do we need it at all? Jan Shankar, sir.
Yeah, theaterization is, if I put it in simple terms, is just putting all our things together and in a joint manner so that all three services fight together in a particular theatre or a particular area. What it'll be and all we'll see but this is the fundamental thing, right? Theaterization has been a topic of discussion for a long time, right? Strictly speaking, theaterization, India is a theatre, one single theatre if you consider it. However, if you consider it in the American terms, but if you look at the Chinese model, it fits in well. It's almost an equivalent thing, right? Having said that, why do you need theaterization? India's history suggests that we won almost all our battles and been able to defend India the way we are. So what is it that theaterization is going to give us? That is something which we have to understand. Theaterization does two things. One, it makes us defend India better at a more optimal cost and with optimal number of forces. That means you're able to do more with less. That's what theaterization should enable if we are to defend India and continue in this. However, as India grows and India seeks its status in the Committee of Nations and India is becoming a regional power of consequence, then theaterization makes a lot of sense. We will not be able to do what we have to do without theaterization. And this is the outline which I have. Over to General Dua.
You pretty much covered everything, General Shankar sir. Let me try and put it for the lay viewers that after World War II, when it was realized that no longer will the wars be fought alone, that is by a single service, where Army, Navy and Air Force would have to fight together, then most militaries effected changes, 66 to be precise for India. Militaries have either created joint structures or have integrated their structures to varying degrees. What does an integrated theatre mean? An integrated theatre means that under one commander, you have elements of all three services together, and they not only operate in an integrated manner, they also do their training, they live together, they train together, and they do joint planning, and that is the most important thing. Rather than the forces coming together at the time of execution of operations, they plan jointly and then have a desired outcome. So they plan for the outcomes together. Like General Shankar also brought out, it also helps in resource optimization, apart from enhancing the combat potential. It also ensures that our processes, our uh, uh, war fighting techniques, all are enmeshed together. I'll leave it at that at the present moment, and we will continue the discussion and discuss different nuances of this integration as we go by.
So, Yandua, since you mentioned integration, so I'd like to ask you, what is the broad roadmap for integration that is being looked at currently, and what are the first steps that we are looking at?
Right. As now coming down to the Indian context, we know that we, our armed forces, we did not take any substantive measures for integrating the three services in the first 5 decades. It's only after 5 decades and 5 wars, after the Kargil conflict, that we started looking at this issue in a very serious manner. Several studies were ordered, reviews were carried out, group of ministers led by Mr. Advani and several task forces later. We started integrating our structures. A headquarter IDS was raised, SFC, the Special Strategic Forces Command, the Andaman and Nicobar Command, and several other structures were raised. But the CDS was not appointed. The Chief of Defence Staff was not appointed, and hence all the efforts that were created were weak efforts, because to be effective, we needed a CDS. To be effective, we needed to go the full length, and the country had not, by not appointing the CDS, our integration was not as effective as it should have been. This has been redeemed now. It's been more than a year and a half nearly, that the CDS has been appointed. The Chief of Defence Staff, by that one appointment, has ensured, without getting into expanding the discussion, has ensured that we have a full-time CDS and not a rotational chairman who also wears the hat of a service, one of the service chiefs, which, as we will discuss as we go along, any service chief is far too outstretched in his roles and responsibilities by virtue of being the chief of that one service itself. So now, having a full-time CDS, the government has also created a Department of Military Affairs, a full-fledged department that has ensured that no longer are the Army, Navy, Air Force attached offices. We were outside the structure of the Ministry of Defense. Today, we have a department headed by a secretary level officer who at the present is being doubled up by the CDS himself. And but the fact is that by creating a department, now the three services have been brought into the ambit of the mainstream of the Ministry of Defense, and it has several implications when it comes down to financial and administrative powers and the legalistic aspects, and we will perhaps discuss about that on some other occasion. So, since I was tracing the journey of how we have empowered and enabled our integration process by in the last year and a half, these are the steps that have taken place. What is sort of a work in progress? as is out in the public domain. Some new processes, some new structures are in the pipeline. For instance, the CDS, the High Court IDS, has now started integrating several logistic functions. Logistic nodes have been formed in all three. Tri-service logistic nodes have been formed in three different places in our country. We are also doing a better job of joint planning, joint training, and several other processes. In terms of structures, we have started raising, I beg your pardon, they recently raised uh, cyber and space structures. They both have started as a cyber agency and a space agency, the Armed Forces Special Operations Division. These are the three structures that have been newly formed in the last 2 years. And we are learning from our experience. Why this is important, apart from just the cyber and the space aspects or the functions by themselves, more structures that we raise, tri-services structures that we raise, we all three services put together will gain more experience in how to work together. And that experience is going to be valuable. It is not only working together in training establishments. When we had an Andaman and Nicobar command, that was that gave us a lot of experience in looking at each other's best practices and also learning about each other's service, so that we could operate effectively, and even at a functional level, we could work together in a day-to-day basis. And the last sentence on this, what we hear in the news, which is out in the open domain, is that the next big structures that are likely to come up very soon in the second half of this year, perhaps, are the integration of the air defense resources of the country. Now, it has been planned that the air defense is something that is going to be integrated. Perhaps Air Force rightly will be the lead service in that, and the air defense resources, platforms, all their tools, etc., are going to be integrated. The next or the first integrated sort of an integrated command that is going to be raised is likely to be the peninsula or the southern or the maritime, whichever is the name. There are different names that are doing the rounds, but that is going to be the pilot structure, the integrated command that is going to be raised. So these are these are the structures that we are looking at in times to come. Thank you.
Interesting, sir. It shows us there is a lot of movement in this particular region. General Shankar, Dua mentioned about the Ministry of Defense and the various pillars of power in the government. Is there something that is being done to kind of amalgamate all these things into one structure wherein there is a singular thought process? Do you have anything that you can tell us with regards to what is being done in this domain?
Yeah. First and foremost, I'll make a slight distinction between integration and jointness. Why? It's only theoretical. Practically, it's all integration. Integration spans everything, all three services, MOD, and the other aspects of our national security system. But I'll make a slight differentiation. Say that whatever happens between the three services is promoting jointness, integrating them into jointness. That is operational in nature, right? So that they're able to fight together and think together and be administered together and all that, staff together, train together, all that. But when you look at integration per se, it is integrating the services with the MOD and integrating the defense structure with the external elements of national security. What are these external elements of national security? There is the MEA, the Home, the Department of Science, the Department of Space, and the Atomic Energy. Right? These integration must take place as we go along and as we modernize our equipment and our outlook. And especially because we are entering a era of multi-domain ops, about that which we can talk later. Right? So the first level of integration or the highest level of integration is between MOD and the external agencies, which has to be done. And for that, the DMA which has been made, I think, is the fundamental brick of this integration. Because it is now, because the DMA is an organ of the government, it's a part of the government, and the CDS is the with he has the right outlook to achieve this integration. Of course, he has to talk with the National Security Advisory Board, the NSA himself, and the higher defense organization. So that is one aspect of integration which has taken place in some manner. In fact, it is not as if we have not had it. After all, if we have DAs all over the world who are functioning with the External Affairs Ministry, they're part of the integration. And we have some people posted to the Home Ministry also, and some people go on deputation to other departments. It's there. But we need to take it much, much further down the line. So that is one level of integration. The second level of integration is between the services and the Ministry of Defense. Like General Dua said, the DMA coming in with the CDS as the secretary, right, is itself a major part of integration. The first step of integration, if you ask, took place when the IDS itself was set up. The Integrated Defense Staff was set up as part of the, it was called Ministry of Defense, Integrated Headquarter of Ministry of Defense, IHQ of MOD. So that started long back, but it stalled really. The second step of integration has started now, with the DMA coming in and part of being the Ministry of Defense. But what is more important is the integration integration between the services and the PSUs, the services and the OFB, services and the DRDO, and services and the MOD. Today, the MOD is largely manned by civilians, and really they do not understand much of what is required beyond a point. It is not that they're, poor or something. They're just good people who have no background idea, right? And they can't be expected to take decisions on weapon systems which they barely understand, or without the background knowledge of operational issues which they don't have. So it is important that the MOD is manned, whether it's in the acquisition process or there's welfare issues or anywhere, right? I feel there has to be a larger manning of the MOD by the services, as also outside. So that integration has to take place. And I feel that, the best model today which is available for this kind of integration is in the Nichols-Goldwater Act of USA. It is enacted, and there this business of jointness, theaterization, and integration of the MOD, or they don't have a MOD really, right? They have the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense and the services and the Pentagon has been done by law, right? Of course, the other model is the Chinese model, where you have the Central Military Commission headed by Xi Jinping, and he's also the General Secretary of the Politburo. That is a different model. I don't think we can ever adopt that. Neither can we adopt the Nichols-Goldwater route, because that such provision and to get that kind of a transformation is very difficult. So we have to find some method of better integration, because without integration, theaterization will not achieve its full value for the nation. Right? Any view on this, Satish?
I can add one small aspect to your first part of your intervention. When you spoke about integration between different elements of power, which is so, you rightly brought out how there is a dire need to affect that, and we don't have any structures. Like you said yourself, brought out about the different DAs being posted, and they are actually on deputation to ME. I've been a DA myself, or when we have officers in MHA. But I think apart from that, there is a need to have an institutionalized structure which creates these linkages. To that extent, we did start a couple of years ago something called a DPC, the Defense Planning Committee. I was the founder secretary of that DPC while I was in service. So there was one effort. See, there is at a higher level, there is a CCS at the ministerial level that coordinates between the big four ministers under the chairmanship of the prime minister, so which coordinates the elements of power. But at a functional level, at a secretary level, we don't have a structure. And the DPC, the Defense Planning Committee, was one such attempt, because you had the secretaries of all four ministries, and you also had the three chiefs under the chairmanship of NSA. So that's a structure that is invoked. It is not permanent, so it meets on issue based.
And
exactly. So till we have a structure, till we have a permanent structure in place, that fills in the gap at a functional level.
So before I move forward, General Shankar, you mentioned something about acquisitions. How will this integration actually affect the acquisitions of various different things? I'd like to spend a little time before I move on to the
okay. Just look at it. Let's see the Air Defense Command, right, is the one which is likely to come in first. Now, one fundamental thing about air defense is ground-to-air missiles, right? So, like India is making the Akash missile systems. Very simple. Now, the moment you integrate everything, then okay, what is it that is to be, should go to the army? What is it that it should go to the Air Force? And how should this be meshed with the overall air defense system? And what is the load on the guy who is producing it? And what are the improvements you need? It is not as if Air Force wants one set of improvements and Army wants another set of improvements. So there's one head thinking for all, right? And then which is the priority and which is the sequencing. Now this leaves out, takes out the competition between two services. And don't forget, Akash will be used for the Navy also, right? So the Navy also will need it. Okay. So I just given you one example. We can extend it. Same thing goes for attack helicopters tomorrow. Same thing goes for drones. So the whole lot of things in procurement are common. And then you can evolve common QRs. You can evolve common mechanisms for procurement. So it will optimize, and then you get the power of scale. Each service doesn't have to go separately. It helps you having the common systems. You talk the common language. You have the common spares. You have common logistics. So there's a whole lot of things in procurement, which procurement is not only capital. There's a whole big thing called revenue, day-to-day maintenance. Okay, where if the Air Force doesn't have a tire, it can take from the Navy or the Army. I'm talking of a drone tire, UAV tire, or something, anything for that matter. That interoperability will also come in, and that will help procurement in the bigger picture. So that's how it is.
Janduva sir, I'd like to ask you this question. After the commands are actually raised, how will the roles and responsibilities of the CDS, the service chiefs, and of course not to forget the theatre commanders be defined or changed in a certain manner?
Adi, while we are still some time away from that happening, but you're right, we should have clarity in our minds as to how the roles will have to be redefined. When integrated theatres are formed, integrated commands are formed, it is okay. Let me begin again. It is very important to have responsibility and accountability clearly laid out. The roles have to be clearly well defined. Today, if you ask anybody, theoretically, they say the Defense Secretary is responsible for defense of India. Now, that is giving, but is there any accountability in that? There can't be. In fact, who prosecutes operations? The CNC, the Commander-in-Chief. Let's say if it's the Army, it's a land battle there, so it's an Army CNC. To support him, it is the Air Force CNC. They are the ones who actually prosecute operations. Is the service chief really responsible? Because he is responsible for the defense of the entire country. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the moment when we get to that stage of having integrated commands, that is the time that we will be able to assign exact clear-cut responsibilities, and there will be very clear accountability in that. And now let me take an example of, let's say there is an integrated command which looks, say the Northern Theatre or the Northern Integrated Command, which is looking after China. Today there are 3 different army commands and 3 different air commands and some part of at least one Navy command that comes into play. Maybe more of elements of Navy will come into play when the theatre expands to maritime. But if so many CNCs are going to come into play or get involved in operations, who is going to coordinate their battle? At present, it is the Chief of Staff Committee, which comprises of the 3 chiefs. We are seeing that how layered we are making it. Something where the OODA loop should be shortened, and especially in today's world where we require this more and more. Shortened OODA loops. Quicker decisions have to be taken. In the eventuality of when the integrated theatres are made, the responsibilities will then be divided as far as the operations are concerned. It will be his responsibility. He will not have to look over his shoulders, because under him he will combine the elements of all 3 services that are required in his integrated command. And he will be responsible. He will be responsible not only for prosecuting operations, he will also be responsible to the leadership, whether it is the defense minister or the prime minister. He will be responsible to the country also for single point advice as far as that particular front, that particular theatre is concerned. What do the chiefs do? The chiefs, the service chiefs, will then be responsible to raise, train, and sustain their respective services. They will be like a force provider, and the integrated theatre commanders will be like force users. Does that mean that, and what will the CDS do? The CDS will then assume an operational role in the sense that he will allocate forces between one theatre to another if the need arises. Now, what is the role of the service chiefs, or what will be the role of service chiefs along with the CDS? The Chief of Staff Committee is the high table. The moment the theatre commander takes a decision and he wants additional forces, who will take the decision? The decision to allocate more forces to him will be taken by this high table, the Chief of Staff Committee, which is formed by the CDS and the 3 service chiefs. The last I would like to end by saying, the high table that will take all the decisions will have the CDS and the 3 service chiefs, and it will also have the integrated theatre commanders, and that will form the high table of the Army, Navy, of all the 3 services put together. Thank you, Adi.
General Shankar sir, would you like to add anything to this discussion that we were having with General Dua right now?
Yeah.
With regards to the responsibilities.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll just put certain things in perspective. Right now this entire thing is a work in progress. Again, like I said, the 2 models which we can go by is the US model and the Chinese model. The Chinese model obviously doesn't suit us too well. So largely we have to model ourselves on the basis of what USA does. Right? That's the only functional model we can have a look at. And the equations between the theatre commanders, who's going to be a new entity, and the service chiefs, and the Chief of Staff Committee, and the Higher Defense Organization, the NSA, has to evolve. We have to find our balance. Then there is an issue of finding an equation, a politico-military equation, once the theatre commanders. See, theatres by nature are not oriented to your borders. They have to look outward. The moment you look outward, for example, if you take a thing which is facing China theater completely, let's assume that there's one theater which faces the north. If it faces the north, it has to necessarily look after China. It has to look after Bangladesh. It has to look after Myanmar. It has to look after probably some part, a maritime part, and maybe even the northeast. I mean, the Far East. So, in which case, it's an outbound phenomenon. If it's an outbound phenomenon, there has to be a politico-military equation. In which case, the politico-military equations between the political executive, the chiefs, and the integrated theatre commands have to work out. So, it's going to take time. It's not going to be easy affair because we have to come out of our own inhibitions within the services and outside, and it'll take time. So we are in the baby step stage, but the good thing is we've started. Let's evolve.
Agree with you, sir. Shankar, I'd like to ask you another question. Does this integration, you spoke about multi-domain warfare. That is something that we're dealing with, especially from China. We can see that, especially during this COVID times. How does this whole integration affect our efforts towards multi-domain warfare?
Right. First and foremost, let's understand this business of multi-domain warfare in a small. The traditional domains have been air, land, and sea. Now you added cyber into it, you added electronics into it, you added space into it, you added resources into it, you added the three warfare strategy, public opinion, propaganda, and all that into it, and even health. With what is happening today, health is also a domain in which you fight through. Economy, all these issues have come in. But when you look at multi-domain warfare holistically again, the warfare still revolves around air, space, and land, and sea. These are the three fundamentals through which you ultimately fight. The rest are all, supporting or, their peacetime activities. They really don't cause violence. They're not violent activities by any stretch of imagination. Yeah, you could call nuclear a separate domain, but that's generally part of the land when it comes to the violence part of it. So if that be so, unless these three systems are integrated, you can't use the other domains, you can't fight through the other domains. Space. If space is a domain through which you have to fight, all three services have to be integrated and joined to have a common space policy. Same thing with cyber. The cyber has no barriers, so you have to have common issues. I mean, for example, let's look at a very fundamental issue, which actually we are working on. All our computer systems, network systems, everything are prone to cyber attacks. Unless you have a common processor which is cyber proof, applicable for all the three services, integrated, joined together, you can't stem the cyber attacks. Right? So you have to, and that cyber attack is coming from a different domain. How do you exploit space? I already spoke to you. How do you exploit energy? Energy is tomorrow a major constraint of the battlefield, right? Yeah. Now how do you exploit fuel cell energy? How do you go to hydrogen economy? All these issues are going to impinge on your battlefield, and it's there already. Okay, and unless the services have a joint approach, you can't. Again, I'll give you an example. Or air independent propulsion in the submarines works on fuel cell economy. Our requirement in high altitude means that you generate energy in situ. So that means hydrogen economy, again come back to fuel cell economy. So if you don't have a common idea about both these, where will you progress? You'll row your own boat in your own creek. So that is how both the multi-domain warfare and the technologies, with new disruptive technologies coming in, you need to have a common approach. How do you get AI into the system? AI doesn't come into the system, AI is not a war fighting mechanism or a weapon. AI enhances weapons. AI integrates weapon systems. It intelligizes the weapon. So if that be so, You have to have a common approach. I mean, just to give you again, I'm getting back to USA because USA is the one which is leading the show in all this. USA has a program where they are spending more than $3 billion for AI. And where is this being done? And this entire business of getting AI into the armed forces is being done at Carnegie Mellon University by a set of joint staff, right? So there is jointness, there is going out, and that's part of the multi-domain warfare and disruptive technology. So there are three angles to it: services, disruptive technology, multi-domain warfare. All these have to mesh. The way to mesh it is to think it through with a common mind, and that's how I see things going ahead. And look, theaterization, everyone understands, is about common theaters and this and that and fighting. Look, there's a whole lot of back end to it, and that back end is what is important. Is theaterization. I will call it jointness. Theaterization, jointness, integration. These are the watchwords which will take us to a different level.
Mm.
Any points you have to add, Satish?
Oh, thank you, sir. You've covered it up very well. These today's new enablers, these global commons like cyber, space, all of the technical enabler field that we talk about, informationized warfare. There are no boundaries between civil and military use and employment, let alone between the three services. So it is really high time we break down our side and actively work.
Actually, what he's brought down is a very important thing. When you say there are no silos between civil and this thing, there's something called civil-military fusion, which USA did in the last century. That's how it became a superpower. Today, in this century, China is doing it. If we don't do it, we're going to be behind the curve, very badly behind the curve. We have to start. Our transformation of India into any kind of a power in the future will hinge heavily upon civil-military fusion. And the fundamental of that civil-military fusion, let me bring it back to the current context, is Atmanirbhar Bharat. If you don't know what is Atmanirbhar Bharat and how you can get the civil-military fusion in, we are out of the equation. So, and that again has to be driven by theaterization and jointness, integration, and it's all together. And that's how you go to multi-domain operations. Right? And that's how it is.
Jandua, so before I go on to some closing comments from both you gentlemen, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that lines are pretty blurred between the military and the civil population. A layman would call it war or psychological warfare, and which is something that we see happening around us pretty much every day. Is there a roadmap that you can see within our system to, one, prevent and to develop our own capabilities?
Well, today, this informationized world that we live in, I think I wouldn't be wrong if I said that perception is actually more important than, is almost more important than reality. Mm-hmm. What is happening? Let's take this standoff that we had in Ladakh between Indian and Chinese armies. What has come out in the media? What is going on in the social media platforms? Do we really know? How many people know that for a fact as to what is happening? But it's a perception that has been created. It is a perception that has been created either by intelligence reports, because the official reports from both sides have been very few. It's a perception that has been created by experts, so-called experts. It is perception that has been created by the propaganda films that we've seen. We've certainly seen Chinese films. I don't know if we've had our own film, but then yes, from our side also we did put out some video clips here and there. So we are trying to create a perception. If you are trying to show some soldiers doing some training, that is not about that war. It's about showing that how equipped and how empowered we are. So getting back to the point, it is not only about use of platforms or about hacking into each other's systems. or about creating better intelligence, because all that is very important, no doubt. But this other layer that gets added on, I think it's time that we realize that the integration and the jointness changes that we are affecting are the changes that major militaries have actually affected earlier. We need to also understand that, and we need to also plan for the future. And for that, we need to enmesh all these things together, because it is no longer only the kinetic um, warfare that will call the shots. This, the other aspect, the informationized warfare, is going to play a very significant part in it too.
Thank you, sir. I think a lot of us would relate to this with the recent happenings. General Shankar, sir, may I request you to give a closing comment on this discussion that we've had today, just to finish up the topic, sir.
Yeah, I think today we've touched upon a few interesting issues, but we just scratched the surface. We've just scratched the surface because that's where we are, right? That's a fun thing. Going ahead, theaterization is the way forward. It's a long road. It's going to be full of problems. There are going to be a lot of issues coming up. It's not only issues coming up with the external environment, internally we have to get over our own hurdles and our own thinking processes, right, and our own inhibitions and that fear of failure, right. And I'll put it in one this thing. Theaterization also involves for each individual service to give up something of theirs for the common good. They have to, they, rather than looking at the individual gain, they have to look at the common gain. So our thinking has to change. But from what has happened till now, things are going okay. And notwithstanding whatever the problems, I'm sure we'll get along and get there.
General sir, may I request you for a closing comment on this topic, sir?
I think it's this reform that we are undergoing was long overdue. We did take some measures in 20 years ago when IDS was formed. That is after Kargil war, generally in the year of 2001. We did start some reforms. However, those were reactive. They were as an aftermath of Kargil conflict that we started looking at this introspection then. But reforms that have started today are very evolutionary. I could call them proactive, because of a felt need, we have started these reforms. As General Shankar said, it is going to take time. It will take time. It will certainly take more time than we plan for, than the mandate that has been given by the leadership, because this is the first time ever we're trying that. But what we also have to remember, okay, time, it might take time, and we should not be in a hurry, because we also must remember that India is a country which has two active borders. Because we have LAC on one side and LOC on one side, and with two different countries. Both are nuclear powered countries. So we are three nuclear rebel countries which do have operational incidents on these active borders. With the result, while we are transforming our structures, moving over to this, the new integration model, we cannot be off balance at any time. So we have to ensure that operationally we are not off balance, that any adversary can take advantage, could take advantage of our situation. Keeping that in mind, let it take as long as it takes. We learn. We will make mistakes. We will learn. We will evolve. We will start a process and then maybe wind it down and start again. All that will take place, but we must evolve a model which is suited to our needs, while we can take lessons from those who have actually gone this path before us. And I'm sure we will do it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both the generals for taking us through the upcoming theaterization process and its various different facets. They have made it very clear with the discussion that this change is for the good, and in the long term, this kind of a change would result in much better utilization of our resources, as well as result in better fighting capabilities for our armed forces. It is critical for us to understand what this entire process is and how it is going to formulate in the future. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up, for the next video coming up on this very topic of the theaterization, we would be discussing the challenges that are being discussed today in strategic circles for us to take up the theaterization to its implementation phase and to see how the armed forces would be able to augment their power for the coming future. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thanks.
Jai Hind.